Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the co-owner and creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and in this video, I want to talk to you a little bit about qualities of the secure attachment style, specifically in the dating stage. So I know a good amount of you saw the video from yesterday, and this is the second part of a series where I'm sort of discussing how different attachment styles appear differently in the dating phase of a relationship and basically what you can do about it. So what you can use this video for essentially is to look at, and please go back and watch the past video if you haven't seen it already, but basically it's how the secure person became secure in the first place and what the offshoot of that was, what the qualities and imprints and characteristics are of a secure person because of the way they were parented, because of the way they attached to caregivers in their environment or had a childhood upbringing. And so what this video is going to focus on is what qualities the secure individual has, especially in the dating stage. And we're going to go through the next set of 6 or so qualities in here. And what you can do is, like, as you're looking through this video or as you're listening, you can take a moment and be like, okay, which of these qualities do I not have within myself? And then try to create some strategies and solutions and tools for refining these. I'm going to give you some high level ones. There's so much I can say about this. We do have courses inside of the school, literally about the 6 stages of relationships for every single attachment style. And our Maze course is about the secure attachment person and how to sort of recognize what qualities they have and work on within yourself. But it's about how each of the different attachment styles show up in the different stages of each of the 6 stages of a relationship, and basically how you can work through the things that are not working for you. So just a quick reminder too, we're doing everything we can to support our community right now. I'm making a daily video as much as possible, and we're offering scholarships inside of our school, as well as 25% off discounts right now for anybody who joins for the membership bundle. So 3 months, 6 months, or single course purchases. And so the coupon code is with you. It's all one word. And when you go to the page, you just put it in the coupon code place when you go to enroll. And that's it. That's all you need to know. So let me go through a little bit of this here. And basically these are qualities. I'll give you 6 core qualities in this video, but it's a continuation from the past video. And then I'll tell you a little bit about how you can refine these qualities within yourself if you watch this and you're like, oh, I'm missing that one, or I could work on this one here. Just some strategies to support this. So first and foremost, it's a tiny, tiny bit of back information. Essentially, because of the way the secure attachment individual is parented, they get consistency. They get taught indirectly that their needs are worthy of being heard or negotiated, that they are, space is worthy of being held for them. Their feelings are okay, they're acceptable. And as a result of believing and feeling these things inherently within yourself, you naturally go on to often build a little bit more self-confidence. And that often impacts the way you bond with other people. And it impacts the way you can become vulnerable and how you show up in those different relationships. So here are some other qualities that really show up with the securely attached individual in the dating stage specifically. So one thing that secure individuals are willing to do is they're willing to see their needs through and give things a chance to change. So let's say, for example, that a secure person is dating somebody who's of an insecure attachment style. And let's say it's a dismissive avoidant. And maybe the dismissive avoidant, isn't calling back or texting, too, often enough, or in a way that's making it seem like the relationship is sort of building momentum and could potentially move into the honeymoon phase. Well, what often happens here is that a secure person will look at something, and this is your strategy. This is what you can do. They'll look at something and they'll go, do I like this person enough to invest in trying to see if a change can take place? And they'll look, and if the answer is yes, they will try. And they won't try once and then be like, oh, you didn't call back enough, and so that's it. They'll wait and they'll try to see things through, and they'll give gentle reminders, and they'll give a certain amount of time to try to, tweak their approach and try from different angles. Now, it won't be something that's excessive. It won't be like, the secure person says, hey, I would love to touch base and at least, text back and forth once a day. And then the dismissive never does it. And then they remind them and then they never do it. And then they just keep in that cycle. That's not how it works. But let's say the secure person does it. The dismissive responds. and does make an effort, and then maybe they drop off a week later. The secure person isn't expecting perfection right out of the gates. They tend to be quite aware that, hey, like we have to learn each other as people. We have to understand each other's imprints and programs. And basically over time, and this is part of the life cycle of a relationship, is learning that, hey, we have to sort of learn what each other's needs are. We have to sort of get conditioned by one another through gentle reminders, through positive reinforcement, through communication, that, hey, this is what I want, this is what I need, this is what's important to me. And we have to kind of adapt it over time because we have our own subconscious perception with expectations and belief patterns. And, you know, the dismissive avoidant, for example, isn't going to have the same expectations necessarily as the anxious or as a secure person. And so what the secure individual is willing to do is communicate their needs more than once and gently remind another party of their needs. And I can tell you, I see so often in relationships between insecure attachment styles, and it's like well-intentioned and I totally understand it. But like, let's say an anxious person communicates their needs to their fearful avoidant partner or their dismissive avoidant partner once. And then let's say the person jumps on board and does it, but then maybe forgets 4 or 5 days later. Usually, because it was so vulnerable and so difficult for the person to originally communicate their needs, they take it as like the ultimate rejection. And they're like, oh my gosh, they're not able to meet the need. And they can write that off. And they can especially do that in the dating stage of a relationship where there's less investment. So what you'll see, and where the secure person sort of differentiates, is that they'll be willing to communicate and not expect perfection right out of the gates. And the anxious person or any other secure attachment style, the fearful avoidant, dismissive avoidant, when they communicate a need, it's not that they're sitting there being like, you have to be perfect right now. It's that they're sitting there and it feels so scary to do. They can't imagine doing it again. And to communicate a need and then have it forgotten about or something like that can often trigger other core wounds and can be so painful. And so it becomes a much bigger deal. But because the secure individual doesn't tend to have as many sort of pre-conditioned wounds and painful belief patterns that can flare up or get activated when something like this happens, they tend to not personalize to the same degree, which gives them room to be able to communicate and sort of see their needs through in a situation. And that's why you can see relationships with secure people. It's not the only reason, but it's one of these main sort of 10 or 12 reasons that I'm sharing with you guys between this video and the last video, that secure individuals tend to keep evolving and not getting stunted at different stages of growth of the relationship to the same degree. So another one is there's this, and this is sort of an offshoot of the original one or the earlier one that I just said, is it, so this is number 2, there's a lack of expectation for other people to mind read. Why? Well, why do people have this in the first place? Who has it the most? Usually fearful avoidance and anxious preoccupied attachment styles. Why is that? Because they had to adapt to their environment and become hyper vigilant about their circumstances and like super be attuned to others in the hopes of getting their needs met or in the hopes of feeling safe in their environment. So a lot of fearful avoidance and anxious preoccupied, dismissive avoidance less so for different reasons, but a lot of those 2 insecure attachment styles often learn to mind read, and not actually mind read, but they really developed their sort of intuitive capabilities to a certain degree because they became hypervigilant about picking up on patterns, micro expressions, body language, tone of voice, any of these changes. And because this is something that happened that is so adapted and the subconscious is reading, often it feels like it's this intuitive knowing that something's up or something's wrong, but really there are little tiny things your subconscious is often picking up on, little changes in patterns, you know, all these different things at a subconscious level that you're not necessarily consciously processing. So for example, you might hear somebody's tone of voice change, or you might know a little pattern shifted, and you might not be like, oh, their tone of voice changed and that means that they are not interested in the relationship, or whatever meaning you might give to the situation. But instead, you notice something, it makes you feel uncomfortable, and then you respond from that space, and it's just a feeling. But there's usually often a subconscious sort of noticing. Basically, and I won't go into this too much, but your conscious mind can only process a certain amount of bits per second of information versus your subconscious can process significantly more information. And so your conscious mind will often like rely on the subconscious to do that work. And so you can think that something feels like an intuitive impulse. And sometimes I really believe in, you know, like gut feelings and deeper intuition and, you know, these sorts of things. But a lot of the time people are mistaking intuition for what's actually just things that they're noticing, but their conscious mind didn't notice, but their subconscious registered, and then relates to other patterns, and then sort of spits out this feeling or response to. So because fearful avoidance and anxious preoccupied develop that as an adaptation, and because they tend to be quite good at that, and maybe the meaning they give to situations isn't always correct, but they usually tend to be spot on with like noticing a change in the pattern or a shift in micro expressions or body language. So what can happen is that then the anxious preoccupied person or fearful avoidant person expects like, well, you should know what I'm feeling. Like, you should be able to tell that my bad mood when I come home from work one day means that something's wrong, and you should sort of like tend to me and make sure I'm okay. But other attachment styles won't necessarily be operating from that same space. Secures and dismissive avoidance might be like, oh, if there was something wrong, you would tell me. If you had a need, you would ask. And so because they don't operate from those same conditions to the same degree, at least most of the time, what can happen is secures are not projecting that expectation from onto others because they're not operating that way, and they usually didn't have to make that adaptation to the same degree. They can pick up on things over time, absolutely, and they still register like micro expressions and body language and all of that stuff, but usually not as strongly. And so both dismissive avoidance and secure individuals, one thing that they do share in common is that they both would prefer direct communication. So for you to say, for example, hey, I'm feeling a little bit sad today, and I need a little bit of love or connection or comforting or whatever it might be. But if you just, sort of are feeling sad and then you don't ask for that, it's easy for somebody else to go, oh, you seem sad, maybe you need space. And that's obviously probably going to be the dismissive avoidance assumption based on their internal programming. And we all tend to project from our perception. So we tend to think, oh, I would need space in that situation, so you must need space. And so secures don't do that. They don't expect other people to mind read, or they don't get upset if people don't. And part of this is a byproduct of what we talked about in the earlier videos, which is like they feel like they can communicate and they are empowered to communicate their needs directly. So sometimes it's even a little bit difficult for them to understand that others wouldn't or aren't operating from that same space. So number 3, secure individuals do tend to have a lack of willingness to hang on to relationships that are toxic and not changing, okay? So they will show up, they will try to see their needs through, they will communicate their needs, they'll do the work, but because they don't usually have as much of an imbalance and sometimes even an over-attachment, a lot of insecure attachment styles can hang on to relationships more or attach more and like sort of cling on more at a subconscious level, because relationships, just like many other things in life, are one of many other things that the subconscious mind uses to try to create its sense of wholeness. So the mind attaches, right? And we know this, like Buddhists talk about this, right? Attachments. And the mind, and not like attachment theory attachments, but like that we naturally cling on to possessions, to relationships, to like possessions being like the house you live in, the car you drive, sometimes these very like superficial things the mind clings on to try to give some kind of self-identity. Like, oh, I am my job, I am my house, I am my family, I am my, fill in the blanks. And the brain definitely does this around relationships. Why? Because it makes the brain feel more secure, to feel like there's things that create its sense of self. And so it's the identification that takes place. And so we identify with other people, and because secure individuals sometimes have less of a strong self-identity to a certain degree because of different traumas that can have happened. This isn't always the case, but there's a tendency for that there's like a correlation there, if that makes sense. And so the result of that is that sometimes insecure attachment styles will cling more to a relationship and try to derive their sense of self more through that, instead of having balance and disbursement throughout the 7 areas of life, as well as having a strong self-identity and purpose and direction and all these things that sort of give you clarity in each of the areas of your life. And so this lack of having sometimes a weaker self-identity, I don't even want to say weaker self-identity, it's not like a weaker self-identity. It's like a bigger void because of pain that's perceived at a subconscious level. So an exaggerated need to attach to other things and identify your sense of self through other things as a subconscious attempt or strategy to try to fill that void. That's how I would best describe it. So the result of that, right, is that then when that is threatened, insecure attachment styles are more likely to fear having this like identity crisis, because if they've been deriving so much of their sense of self through a relationship, and then the relationship goes, they feel like they're losing such a big part of themselves and the traits they've identified with another person and all these different things. And so they'll hold on sometimes longer to relationships that are more toxic or that are not healthy and not, the partner's not willing to do the work, isn't showing up, versus a secure individual will often show up, believe in themselves to be able to leave. They'll see their needs through. They'll try to communicate. They'll see if it's working, and then if it's not, they'll be like, okay, it's not working. It's time for me to go. And they'll know that that's the healthiest thing. So I'm going to give you the next three at more of a high level, because I feel like there's so much to say for each of these points. And by the way, this is just for the dating stage. Then we can go through like all the other stages of a relationship. I probably honestly won't do a whole series on that, because it would be like the next 19 videos. There's a course inside the school around this, but I can give other like high level points if you guys are interested and stuff like that. So the next one is that often secure individuals are able to see, okay, let's say it this way. I'll put it this way first and I'll reframe it. They're able to see, hear, and understand others better in conflict. Okay, so while in conflict, they can see, hear, and understand other people better, because there are certain places that people lose their ability to empathize. And here's what they are. Number one, some people actually short circuit a little bit around empathy as a whole, as a subconscious strategy to keep themselves safe. If there's a lot of pain, if relating to others too deeply or wanting to relate to others too deeply cause too much pain, people can sort of build a lot of subconscious programs around not trying to empathize too much with others, not trying to feel too much towards others. And sometimes you'll see the manifestation of that in narcissistic personality disorder, for example, is characterized. One of the qualities in the DSM is lack of empathy. That's one of the qualities. That doesn't have to be there at all times, but it's quite common. So that lack of empathy can also show up. I don't want to say it's like always dismissive avoidance more, but it can be dismissive avoidance more, because relating to others vulnerably felt really painful. But I also will say that there's a bigger myth than there should be that dismissive avoidance don't feel empathy. They tend to empathize a lot more than I think most people think, but it's just more internalized and internally processed. So what can happen, right, is we can lose empathy in a larger space like that, where people short circuit a little bit. But people often lose empathy when they're really triggered, right? They stop seeing. It's not sympathy, like feeling for somebody else. It's empathy. And empathy is like really seeing, hearing, trying to understand and relate to somebody else's perspective and sort of recognize what they would feel or what you would feel if you were in their shoes. And so it's not this like, oh, I see you're in pain and that hurts, or I feel guilty that you're in pain. It's like, oh, I can see why when I make that comment, you would feel misunderstood or you would feel afraid. And it's really putting like cause and effect between situations without personalizing it. Now, the insecure attachment styles who are experiencing really painful wounds when it comes to relating to others, and this is not always the case, this is very specifically around core triggers or core wounds, but what can take place is that an insecure attachment style can, let's say your core wound is touched on feeling like abandoned or unloved or trapped. You can get so consumed by your feelings and your triggers that you forget to be able to go, oh yeah, and what's this person feeling right now? And why might they feel that way? And so you lose your ability in that moment to a certain degree to fully empathize with somebody else in a healthy manner. Whereas secure individuals, because they often have less stored subconscious wounds, and the severity of those subconscious wounds tends to be less, they don't tend to be triggered enough that they lose their ability to see others as a result, right? You can think of those things sort of moving inversely, like they're like inversely correlated to a certain degree. And so That's really important to realize as well. So the next thing, and I'm going to give you these. So think of it this way. If this is something you want to work on, you can work on specifically like trying to practice seeing, hearing, understanding what somebody else might be going through when you're in a small conflict. Like, what might they be feeling right now? And what's the sponsoring intention behind their actions? Like, why did they do what they did? What might they have been feeling that's causing that? And most of us naturally do that when we're not triggered, but it's really important to bring that conscious perspective online when you are. And it really helps to depersonalize things and not make things so personal, right? It's easier to see, oh my gosh, that person might have been short with me because they were actually feeling really insecure and ashamed about something, and it wasn't about them disliking me. And just being able to make that distinction, even if you can't know that conclusively, just to know that like it's not 100% about them disliking you, it could actually be this or this too, pull some of that weight out of that original assumption that the subconscious mind likes to make, usually in relationship to what its core wounds already are. So the last two things I'm going to say, and I'm not going to get into all these right now in detail because I know this is already like a super long video, but last two. Secure individuals maintain a relationship to themselves and balance across all 7 areas of life. They don't tend to be like using the relationship as some form of addiction or to fill voids, right? They fill voids, but it's not from a space of like, I need this to fill my cup. It's like, this is a healthy benefit to my life and this is beautiful and I appreciate this, instead of like oh my gosh, I need to feel loved by this person to feel like I matter or to feel like I'm significant. Instead of being able to go, hey, this love and this relationship matters to me, and it's a healthy symbiosis of energetic exchange, or like, whatever else you want to say about it. So that's a really important point. And if you are seeing that there's a void there, it's really important to check in with the 7 areas of your life and be like, okay, where am I imbalanced and how can I show up better in those areas? Like, maybe I haven't been, super checking in with family or friends. Okay, great. What are some strategies there? What can I do once or twice a week to just touch base there and be better in that area? And lastly, secure individuals can also apologize and forgive more easily. And this is usually because it also isn't a hit to core wounds. It also doesn't usually have the meaning attached to it that if I forgive, I'm like giving my power away, or I'm, this person's going to hurt me again. A lot of fearful avoidance, for example, and sometimes anxious and dismissives, actually, all insecure attachment styles to a degree, but for different reasons. A lot of them have a fear of forgiving because they don't trust themselves enough to set boundaries. So they think, if I forgive this right now, I make it okay for you to do this to me again. And so you're going to do it again. But forgiveness doesn't mean you forego boundaries. Like, you can forgive somebody and then turn around and be like, okay, listen, this is the boundary in this area. This is what it looks like. This is the need that I have. This is how you have to operate in this specific area so that this doesn't recur. Are you on board? What's your strategy to work on this with me? How can we work on this collectively? And see that boundary through. If somebody starts infringing, you can go, hey, remember, we had that conversation, and keep showing up for that boundary. But when somebody doesn't trust themselves to do that effectively, or to know that they even can do it sometimes, then when somebody does something that violates a boundary or hurts you in some way, it can be that much more terrifying. I can make a separate video about that, by the way. Anyways, so I hope this is all helpful. This was the part 2. Thank you again so much for being here and for being a part of this community. And if you're getting a lot of value out of this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you in the next video.